So today I wanted to talk about some of the special rules that you should be aware of for bills that propose to amend ballot measures. When ballot measures are approved by the voters, the electorate of this state, that allow amendments to their provisions by the legislature, there are specific rules that must be followed. Generally, the ballot measures that allow legislative amendments often specify a heightened or a super majority vote threshold, sometimes even waiting periods before action can be taken on bills that amend those ballot measures. In order to reflect these specified procedures, the legislature has a number of rules. For example, in the joint rules of the Senate and Assembly, there are procedures for bills that propose to amend four previously enacted ballot measures. They are bills amending Title IX of the Government Code, which is the Political Reform Act, and Joint Rule 8.8 requires that upon introduction or amendment of a bill amending the PRA, the chief clerk of the Assembly and the secretary of the Senate have to be notified of the nature of the bill, and then the chief clerk or Senate secretary has to deliver a copy of that bill as introduced or amended to the Fair Political Practices Commission. Joint Rule 8.9 deals with bills amending the California Stem Cell Research and Cures Act. And here, anyone who is proposing to amend, add, or repeal any of the statutory provisions of the California Stem Cell Research and Cures Act has to notify the Assembly Chief Clerk or the Senate Secretary of the nature of the bill, and at least 14 days prior to passage in either the Assembly or Senate, the Chief Clerk and the Senate Secretary have to make copies of the bills available in the bill room for access by the public and the news media. Then there's Joint Rule 8.95 that deals with bills amending Section 6 of the Smaller Classes, Safer Schools and Financial Accountability Act. And when an author introduces or amends a bill, they too have to notify the Assembly Chief Clerk or the Senate Secretary, depending where it is, of the nature of the bill, and also at least 14 days prior to passage in the Assembly or Senate, the Chief Clerk or the Senate Secretary have to make copies of that bill as introduced or amended available in the bill room at the Capitol for access by the public and the news media. And then there's also Joint Rule 8.96 that deals with bills amending the Protect App-Based Drivers and Services Act. And here, any member of the legislature who wants to amend, add, or repeal any of the statutory provisions of Prop 22, when they introduce the bill or they amend the bill, they have to notify the Assembly Chief Clerk or Senate Secretary. And then at least 12 business days prior to the bill passing the Assembly or Senate, the Chief Clerk or the Senate Secretary has to print, publish on the internet, and distribute to legislators the bill in its final form. There are several similar rules for bills considered in the state assembly. For example, Assembly Rule 69.1 provides the same sort of information for the consideration of political reform bills, including that they can't be passed until 12 days prior to being considered. The bill is in its final form and has been delivered to the Chief Clerk or by the Chief Clerk to the Fair Political Practices Commission. And then Assembly Rule 69.2 is the same language dealing with the consideration of bills that amend the California Stem Cell Research and Cures Act. So as a result of these provisions of the joint rules of the two houses, as well as the Assembly rules, legislators, sponsors, and staff, and of course lobbyists who plan to propose legislation to amend, add, or repeal any of the provisions related to these four previously approved voter initiatives need to keep these specialized rules in mind and then obviously comply with them.